Peer pressure can be both positive and negative. Sit next to a good student, statistically, you're more likely to take better notes. Sit next to a slacker, you're more likely to goof off. Any teacher will tell you that. If you take a slacker and put them next to a good student, you can surround them with people who might help to raise them just a little bit. An interview was done with a 104-year-old in a retirement home and said, "What's the best thing about being 104? And she said, "I've outlived all my friends. There's no more peer pressure." It's true. I don't know what negative peer pressure you could have at 104, but I guess you could have some. Todd Rogers, who's the professor of public policy at Harvard, said that there's a difference between peer pressure from people who are better and people who are way better. That sometimes being matched with somebody who's superior to you can be negative peer pressure in a way that you didn't intend. Okay? I will confess to you my new addiction. My new addiction is The Biggest Loser. It's now back again. I think it's on TBS this time. I always loved that show. I love rooting for the underdog. I love the stories of success. And this week there was a woman on The Biggest Loser in the first episode who had to run a mile. And they were all talking about how difficult it was going to be to run a mile, but how they used to run a mile. And she said, "I've never run a mile. Why would I run a mile unless someone's chasing me or my butt's on fire? Why would I run a mile?" So she ran the mile, and she was the very back of the pack. And her coach ran with her the entire time and never left her side. "You can do it. Don't you dare give up, girl. Come on. If you need to walk, walk, but you're moving. Let's go. We're going to do this." Running a mile with your coach is positive peer pressure, right? It's encouraging with your friends. Running a mile with the guy from Ethiopia that broke the world's record in the Boston Marathon, that's not peer pressure. That's intimidation. I'm going to give that up real quick because you know what? Why am I trying? Why am I trying? There was a study that was done that Rogers did at he didn't do it at Harvard, but he did it throughout a survey with 1,000 students in an online open class. And each one of these students was able to grade and read other people's papers. It was an experiment in education. Those paired with better students excelled. Those paired with superior students quit. Because they found that why am I doing this? I can't compete with, I stink. Why bother? When someone raised my bar, it encouraged me, but when somebody was so far superior to me that it made me feel unworthy, I just gave up. That's what they found in this study. Jesus says this today: "Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Wow, that's a high bar. That's exactly what we're talking about today. Unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and Pharisees. But how? What is righteousness? First off, righteousness is an odd word. We don't use the term righteousness except for church. One scholar I was reading this week said the word righteousness can be best expressed in some sort of colloquial phrases we might use in the world today, like cool. I'm cool with it. We're cool. I'm cool with her now. We had problems, but we're cool now, right? We're good now. We didn't used to be good, but we're good now. Righteousness is being good with God, being cool with God, being in a good place in your relationship with God. That's righteousness. How can our righteousness exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, the ones who kept the law? They got it right. They knew every jot and tittle of that law, because they yelled at Jesus all the time for not doing it too, right? That was there. We're talking about this in our disciple Bible study, about how scribes and Pharisees were who they were because of this Old Testament theology that every time we screw it up, we end up in some sort of exile. And so we better not offend God. So they're raised this class of people who keep every jot and tittle and make sure God is not offended by any of us. Because if any of us offend God, all of us suffer. If any of us offend God, all of us go back to Egypt. If any of us offend God, all of us go back and get taken over by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And so what happened is this raising a class of people who said, we're going to make sure that God is not offended, and we're going to tell you exactly how to do it. We're not going to let God be offended, so no one better screw this up, or we're all in trouble. How can you keep the law better than a scribe or a Pharisee? It's literally impossible. And then Jesus flips it upside down and says this. How do you do it? You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. That's how. He doesn't say you need to become light. He doesn't say you should try to be light. He doesn't say you should live your life in a way that gives light. He says you are the light of the world. You are. It's who you already are by the nature of your baptism. You are God's light in the world around you. A city on a hill won't shine if its light is not shining. I read something about, I've never realized this before. A city on a hill. That's nice, but what is that about? Why would anyone care about the lights of a city on a hill? That's the reference to a night traveler. Because it's in the desert. There are very few street lights in the desert, in case you haven't noticed. And even less in the first century. Right? There are very few street signs in the first century Jerusalem. A city on a hill was how you got your bearing. It pointed you in the direction you needed to go. The city on the hill and its lights was something you could see from far away, and it became the thing that gave you direction in your travel. Because it would give you something, it's like looking for a North Star. When you see what it is you're looking for, you know in which direction you should be traveling. The city on a hill metaphor is saying to us, we are the ones who are God's light in the world and can be the ones that give direction to those who are lost. This is what it means to be God's people. Salt. Salt has a bad connotation today. We're in salt-free diets and low salt food because of our hearts, right? And our blood pressure and salt. But do you realize you also can't not have salt? Do you know what happens if you drink too much water? You die. Do you realize you can drink too much water? If your sodium levels get too low, you will die. We need sodium. Salt in this day was important because salt was also how they preserved their food. You couldn't go to the Walmart or the Sam's Club, they were very hard to find in the first century, and buy a refrigerator. And where would you plug it in? Salt was how you preserved your food. If you wanted to live, you needed salt. Salt was important for healing, for cleansing. Salt was an important part. Mineral springs, the salt springs for relaxation. Salt was an important part of this culture, so much so, if you ever travel with me to Salzburg, Austria, I will take you to the salt mines and the green river of the Salzach River in Salzburg, Austria, where the Roman Empire at this time went through the Bremer Pass into Austria to get the salt to bring it back to Rome to use as payment. What is the word you use for your payment you get from your boss?
Salary.
Your salary. Sale, salt. The ancient Romans paid in salt. It was that important. You are worth your weight in salt, right? That's where that saying comes from. Sale, salt. It's an important part of this culture that we've lost, and so we don't always understand the biblical metaphors because, well, salt, I'm not supposed to have that. My doctor says I have high blood pressure, right? But salt is important. You are the salt of the earth. You, your faith, your understanding of what it means to live the gospel gives life. It preserves. Your salt is necessary for the world to have life, and to have life abundantly, as Jesus would say. You see, what Jesus is pointing out to us today is that the Pharisees and Sadducees and the scribes, they're spiritual superstars. They got it better than we'll ever get it when it comes to enjoying the law, perfecting the law. And they're probably pretty good people, let's be honest. They weren't cruel or mean. They tried very hard to be loving people. And even those laws were meant for love. They didn't want God to be offended, because if God got offended, we paid. So even that purpose of the law was to keep people safe before an angry God. Jesus wasn't saying they were wrong. They just did it for the wrong purpose. Listen later in Matthew where he says, "For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you've neglected the weightier matters, the heavier matters, the ones that matter, like law, justice, mercy, and faith." What he's saying in the Gospel of Rob is, you're doing all the right things, but you're doing them for the wrong reasons. You're missing that. You're so busy keeping the letter of the law that you're forgetting the spirit of the law. And we see that all through Matthew, don't we? He picks grain on the Sabbath, and Jesus says the Sabbath was meant for man. Man wasn't meant for the Sabbath. I mean, what are you doing? The laws are important, but when you feed the poor, you feed the poor. It's really important for us to remember that you can get things so right that you end up being wrong. It's like in a marriage when I say to a couple this, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You ever had that experience? Do you want to be right? Because you can be right and be miserable. If you've ever had a teenager, you'll know. You can be right or you can be happy. It doesn't always go together. The Pharisees were right, but they missed the point. That's what Jesus is saying. You did all the right tithes, but you missed the weightier matter: justice and righteousness, compassion, kindness, mercy, faith. Those Pharisees cannot be our role model any more than 21st century Christians can sometimes be our role model. The Pharisees in the church today who make their living by making other Christians and other non-Christians feel unworthy because they don't live up to their standards. I don't need to name names. You've seen them on television. They're 21st century Pharisees, and they can never be our role models either. You see, what Jesus tells us today is that if we're going to be the light of the world, if we're going to be the salt of the earth, then we need to live. We started with verse 13. We need to leave verses 1 through 12. We need to live that, the Beatitudes. Mercy, kindness, seeking for righteousness and justice. When we have those as our core, then all the sacrifices, all the pretty things we wear, all the beauty of our church around us, then it really matters. But until then, all of this has missed the point. Today, let us commit ourselves to true discipleship that gets beyond the trappings of right religion and gets down to where it really matters. The weightier matters, Jesus calls them: love, compassion, mercy, and kindness. That's what it means to be God's light and God's salt.